Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is an overview summary of the first season of the Oxford Smart Space panel on space commerce and governance. I'm Marc Ventresca, a faculty member here at Saïd Business School and Wolfson College, and in conjunction with a number of colleagues in the Oxford Space Initiative from Pembroke College at the European Space Agency and the Oxford Aeronautical Society, we put together a series of 6 hour-long panels that introduced a very diverse crowd of experts, astronauts, scholars, policymakers, venture capitalists, entrepreneurs, to help us really understand what's happening in the global space sector today. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We start with an introduction to this concept of smart space, and we draw out a number of our guest speakers on these key topics of sustainability, governance, and collaboration that are really the underpinning concepts for smart space. When we talk about smart space, we point to initiatives where decades of direct investment by a few governments, exploration-focused, world-shaped, old space, and in contrast to what is often referred to as new space, these nimble entrepreneurial and commercial initiatives. This conjunction between these two broad frames is often generative of new discoveries and further innovation. Our colleague Robert Eberhardt, professor at Stanford University Graduate School of Business and Associate Director of Research on Entrepreneurship and Society, speaks to these issues very directly.
After all, after Columbus' first voyage, it was 50 years for a major follow-up and 103 years until anything commercial started going. And the regular voyages that went between Europe and the United States were commercial. After all, this is what the world looked like to Columbus. And the initial voyages, just like in space, were government funded. And they used advanced technology of the time to conduct their voyages. They weren't commercial or weren't successfully commercial. It took only it was about 100 years later that commercialization and settlement started happening in the technology, and the technology advanced to make that happen.
Okay, let's look onward now. I want to introduce a vignette by Frank White, a colleague at the Harvard Space for Humanity Foundation, where he begins to talk about this question: have we yet, or will we ever complete the space equivalent of that transition from old oceans to new oceans?
I think it's important to look at the American experience and understand that this kind of public-private partnership is within the tradition. It's within the tradition of railroads, airlines, even the internet, where the government takes the lead and then eventually begins to turn over much of the activity to the private sector. And so in my own mind, that is what is happening today with NASA, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and other entities. And it's a symbiotic relationship when it works well.
Even when this partnership, this collaboration is working well, that is, even when the public and the private sector partners are working, have common goals, have begun to think through how to proceed, those same partners still have a lot to negotiate in terms of rules and relationships, ownership, rights, responsibilities, long-term issues that will shape the sector going forward. I'm very delighted we were able to engage Sumara Thompson King, who is the general counsel at NASA, to describe some of these key issues. Over to Dr. Thompson King now.
Topics that I think we are going to need to resolve as we move forward with supporting commercial space activities, or what I call CCD, which is we've got to deal with issues of conjunction, communication issues, and debris issues. What's conjunction? Basically, conjunction is when you have satellites or any type of entities in orbit. We don't want them to come close to each other. That could interfere with each of their operations. We've got to establish norms. We've got to talk about how we're going to address conjunction issues. Another issue is communication, spectrum issues. Who gets to use what area of spectrum for communication, for commercial satellites, for military satellites, and for government agencies in their exploration activities? Those are things we have to work out. And then the last is debris. We all know that there is a lot of debris floating around in low Earth orbit, which interferes with, frankly, our operation of the International Space Station.
All right, so now I'm going to call on a colleague of ours, Luc Piguet from ClearSpace, talking about his experience of working with the European Space Agency. This is the work of actually making these things possible, making them real. So establishing norms, discovering how relationships between the space agencies and commercial companies, in particular startup ventures, work, reacting to new political administration and environments. This is what's currently happening. And again, as an innovation scholar, I'm going to remind you, these things happen not by fiat, they happen by experiment. Many players, partners, agencies, companies, ventures, there's an enormous amount of experimentation today in the space sector, not only at the level of rocket technology, but all the everyday ways that firms and other agencies collaborate. A lot of learning is going on, mistakes, challenges. Again, this is the work of experimentation to turn possibility into practice. So here, a few words from Luc Piguet from ClearSpace.
Obviously, at the beginning, there's more friction. There's a very different cultures between a culture that you find inside of a space agency or a culture that you find inside of a startup. And it took some time to get aligned, and then, but then at the same time, it forced us also to integrate new models or new ways of doing things, or ways of doing things that we wouldn't have considered from the start. And I think this has been an extremely enriching exercise for us. The other aspect for us that is interesting in this collaboration is that the agency typically has standard ways of doing mission, and the startup has a completely blank sheet of paper at the very beginning, where we can essentially write whatever we think is right and introduce experience or methods or new ways of doing things that would be much more difficult to put in place into larger organization where everything is already structured, where all the processes are already in place, which gives us a lot of freedom to rethink some of the dimensions of the mission, the way we're going to try to correspond to the standards that have to be achieved, but then still think, is there a way to do that could be cheaper, more effective, faster, or that can bring us to the same results with essentially a lower cost of execution.
I'd like now we'll move on to thinking about something that is really vivid to everyone who's paying attention to the space sector. There's an enormous amount of money, private funding, venture capital funding coming into the space sector. And so exactly what we've been talking about so far, these experiments in collaboration can be complicated simply by the sheer amount of venture funding that is showing up in the space sector. Here, Hélène Ubi from the Carmen Project and Global Space Ventures really has a chance to explain to us some of that activity, the challenges it poses, and how she and others are resolving it.
I think there is a very important role here for space agencies to invest in very advanced technology. Speak about nuclear propulsion, for example. The US are starting to do that right now, with specifically on nuclear propulsion, more and more investment coming both from DARPA and from NASA. But I think in other areas of the world, would be good that more and more space agencies really think about long-term, what are the key tech we need, and then invest much more money into that and have a clear separation between what can be funded by the private sector and what shall be funded by the public money. And I think looking down to the past, we didn't have that distinction because there was no private funding for space, or very limited. But now that we have one, I think there is really a new important role for space agencies to fund heavily key tech technologies that will never be funded by private sector. And on the contrary, not funding stuff that can be funded by private sector.
I think for all of us involved in the Oxford Space Initiative, one of the most striking things about the panels, the smart space broadcasts that we're bringing to you today in summary form, is literally the variety and range of businesses and applications making use of space technology to solve a range of problems on Earth. There's remarkable variety and ferment in what firms are doing who are involved in the space sector, how they're using space, and what kinds of applications for Earth-based solutions, particularly regarding the Sustainable Development Goals, there are. My colleague, David Lehman on the project said a while ago in a very thoughtful point, he said, space is the new digital. It's actually crossing many boundaries and engaging firms in every sector and every industry. Here, we hear from Josephine Millward, who's the head of research at Seraphim Capital, one of those dedicated space venture capital firms who has extremely acute insights on just this plurality of ventures, plurality of applications, plurality of impacts. Over to Josephine now.
Innovation in small sats and sensors has made a wide range of new data sets available. So I'm talking about synthetic aperture radar, infrared, multispectral, even radio frequency. And one of the biggest problems to go after, in my opinion, is how do we use all these new data to combat climate change? We can use a satellite to detect greenhouse gas emissions, to figure out who's polluting and where the polluter is located. We can monitor and track deforestation and detect illegal logging. I think geospatial data is going to play a very important role in protecting our environment. And this is just the beginning. There are so many more new business cases.
One of the interesting domains for space is really questions of human health, longevity, new kinds of ways to understand the human body in zero gravity environments. Again, I think this is familiar to all of us from the range of videos we see of astronauts in zero gravity, some of them playful, others of them more serious. Really happy to have join us now Simon Adebola, a physician, long-term person who's worked in the global health sector for a number of agencies now for a private health firm. He's a physician who's been fascinated by space for many times. He's also one of our alumni from the school, the business school. Really happy then, Simon Adebola, a senior expert working at this intersection of space sector, healthcare, and technology. Especially interested he is in economic development and inclusion, particularly with regard to bringing in African countries and African experts into the space conversations. So now over to Simon Adebola.
I work in the area of integrated space applications, and that essentially means that we try to combine geoinformation, which is Earth observation, remote sensing capabilities derived by space satellites that orbit the Earth with their cameras, taking measurements of the Earth using essentially the data there. They generate a lot of Earth observation data, and that's geo-observation. We combine that with geo-navigation, which is what we know in the GPS satellites, and also the telecommunications capabilities offered by the different telecommunications satellites, some in geostationary orbit and others providing closer to Earth capabilities for connecting. So everything from telephony to broadband. The idea is that by integrating these capabilities, we can deliver better value for health, we can deliver better value for education, agriculture, food security, water resource management, and other areas that are common to the development domain, just the human domain in general, and have been captured in the Millennium Development Goals as well as the Sustainable Development Goals.
Simon Adebola and others have really helped us understand something about the public health issues and the interdisciplinary connections that link human well-being and space for the long term to a variety of other insights for well-being and health and for experiments in everything from new kinds of surgeries, spinal cord surgeries, to developing medical devices that work in zero gravity and so forth. So a very rich area. That focus on the plurality of knowledge, the range of disciplines, the variety of people is a theme many of our speakers echoed and really emphasized. Our next speaker, Professor Johnson Fries from the U.S. Naval War College, has a long-time perspective on just this question of variety of perspective, variety of experience, diversity of insight, diversity of background, on how that impacts positively space sector activities.
bringing in dancers, bringing in artists, bringing in individuals who have an entirely different background than STEM adds to it in ways we can't even imagine. And some of it is simply putting out imagery that allows us to imagine more than we are able to otherwise. So I think it is absolutely important that even the multidisciplinary curriculum that we have so far goes further, extends out further to the arts, to areas beyond engineering and business and policy and medicine, and recognize that to go into space, we take everything with us. We take everything all our baggage goes with us, and we need to support that.
These first couple of speakers and vignettes give us a quick review of some of the most interesting ideas and maybe some of the unexpected ideas or new ideas that we discussed in that first season of the Smart Space series. Where do we go from here? What are the issues that need continued exploration, that really require new ways of thinking to find new solutions going forward? And where can we, all of us as academics, leaders, entrepreneurs, students, policymakers, scientists, engineers, artists, and others, how can we best contribute? I think one of the most important concerns for the future of space sector and for all of us is sustainability. At the school, at the Saïd Business School, we have many colleagues who are working with enormous insight on these questions of sustainability for the firm, for society, for agricultural and food systems, and many other topics in sustainability. I think in the series, there was not a single episode in which someone did not mention this question of space debris and the challenges of reuse of launch capabilities. As you may know, humans have not only littered on the Earth and in the oceans, but we've littered in space, and that's a huge domain of activity, often referred to as space debris mitigation. Here, our colleague Chris Blackerby, who's the COO at Astroscale, a Japanese-based but global firm, really a leader in this question of space debris mitigation, talks to us about this broad issue, both the science of it, the practical issues, and the policy issues. Space debris is a huge problem, and one becoming even more salient with every passing month, with the, as you may know, with the planned launch of many thousands of satellites, with more and more space traffic. This is it's a human-made congestion issue. So over to Chris Blackerby now from Astroscale.
This idea of servicing and reusability, and that is a trend that we see. It's not going to stop. SpaceX has demonstrated it. Blue Origin's demonstrating it. So many others are focused on this. We're focused on it. We see a huge business opportunity on servicing, and that means debris removal. It means refueling. It means life extension. It's no more a throwaway culture of we launch and we get rid of, recycling in space, foundries in space. That stuff's coming. Now that's a little bit farther down the line, but we're taking the first steps up that mountain right now. And so that's a trend that we see has already been demonstrated, and we see that continuing.
Sustainability, I think, could occupy all of our energy. Incredibly important questions, both the fact of sustainable human presence in space and the ways that space can help us understand sustainability issues on Earth. Very important set of issues. I think linked to that really directly is a different kind of governance question, what I'm going to call the governance of the commons. Many of you may know the work of Elinor Ostrom, political scientist who received the Nobel Prize a decade or so ago, who really got us thinking about how do we govern the commons? How do we establish norms and responsibilities and rules of the game that allow not only for use today, but the preservation of those common good resources over the long term. Very excited here. We had Sebastian Maranta from the European Space Policy Institute, who joined us to speak on these issues.
There are new challenges that are related to a more intense, a more global, a more diverse space activity. And so what we are challenged to do is really to find a compromise on necessary rules and solutions to tackle these issues, that do not hinder the positive developments that we have seen unfold recently. Now, in this frame, what will be the role of private actors? My personal conviction is that it should be prominent. It should be really a prominent role, both with regards to corporate responsibility. Of course, as Luc is here today, also to provide solutions to tackle these issues. And I think it's very important that that we take into account that anyway the solution has to come as the result of a dialogue between public and private actors and at international level as well.
These are some of the core and broad themes that are structuring and organizing space sector going forward. Under each of these issues are questions of collaboration and coordination. How do we work together across sectors, across peoples, across countries? You know, this is a really fundamental question of collaboration and coordination. So what makes collaboration work is a sense of common purpose. And our colleague Simon Adebola sums this up in a series of very succinct and strong insights about this question of core collaboration and coordination. Over to Simon again.
So we come together for what? For that purpose, to deliver value for mankind. I would say that as we tap into leverage, utilize, harness the capabilities that the space sector and our engagement in it thus far have offered, we should remember that this is for all mankind, and we should go one step further. After planting our flag or boasting about what we've done as a country or as a people, let's remember that the rest of mankind can be a part of this. I would say, therefore, that responsible utilization is inclusive utilization, because this is really for all mankind.
I hope you've enjoyed these vignettes. I encourage you to think about watching the full panel discussions. They're barely an hour long each. You can actually enjoy them in many settings. They're available through a number of different social media, and they're available on the internet. I hope this has given you a flavor of some of what we're doing. I am Marc Ventresca, a faculty member at Oxford University and part of the Oxford Space Initiative. I very much appreciate you taking time to watch these vignettes. I hope you'll join us soon for further investigations into this whole world of smart space, the continued salience of public sector collaboration, funding, insight, and activity, along with incredibly exciting ventures, startups, and a world that is being transformed in venture funding.